Good evening from Rocky Mountain PBS. I'm Cynthia Hessen. This is Colorado State of Mind. 5 new women were elected to the U.S. Senate last week, bringing the total to an all-time high of 20 women senators, 20% of the votes in that body. That got us thinking again about women in roles of leadership and power, and in fact, the roles and choices women have across the board. In the July issue of The Atlantic magazine, an article by Princeton professor and former State Department official Anne-Marie Slaughter touched off a widespread debate among women around the country. Slaughter's writing, titled "Why Women Still Can't Have It All," revisits what may seem to some as an old issue, but of course these are the choices being made every day by women about their families and their careers, and in the 21st century, roles and attitudes are always evolving. To talk about it tonight, we have 3 Colorado women who can be called thought leaders on the subject, certainly among their friends and peers. Heather Lamb is a media technology consultant. She's married and has 3 children, a daughter and 2 sons, aged 1 to 8. Barbara O'Brien is the former Lieutenant Governor of Colorado, now an education specialist at the Piton Foundation. She's married and has 2 boys who are grown. And Ann Geldzaler of Denver is an attorney by training, a graduate of the Yale Law School. She and her husband have 2 boys and a girl, ages 7 to 14. Anne-Marie Slaughter wrote that it's time to stop fooling ourselves. The women who have managed to be both mothers and top professionals are either superhuman, rich, or self-employed. She also says that if we truly believe in equal opportunity for all women, it will take a woman president, 50 women senators, and ensuring women are also equally represented in the ranks of corporate executives and judicial leaders. That, she says, is how to make jobs and society work better for all women. Barbara, I'm going to start with you. Give us a little background on you and how you came to run for Lieutenant Governor in 2006. Is that something you thought you would do when you were younger?
No, and I think it's important for young women and actually all young people to know that in this world, very often you can't plan where you're headed and you need to stay flexible. So I always thought I was going to be an English teacher, and by the time I finished graduate school, realized I wasn't going to be a scholar. That didn't really interest me, and I was looking around for work where I could read and write and think, and Heather's father, Governor Dick Lamb, hired me to be his education advisor and his speechwriter, and that I was bitten by the bug. That led to years working on children's issues, including improving the education system, and one day Bill Ritter called and said, "I want you to run with me for Lieutenant Governor." It wasn't my plan, it wasn't my idea, but I thought, how do you say no? How do you not take the chance? Because what if you could work on the issues you care about at that level? So I talked with my husband and boys, and they were totally in, and so I jumped in with both feet.
That is wonderful. Well, let's move to Heather Lamb, who grew up in the governor's mansion for quite a while, and your mother, Dottie, has written a lot about this, about women's roles. How did that affect you growing up? Where did you think you would head?
I guess, I mean, I was lucky, very lucky, I think, to grow up in a household and also in a generation where it was assumed that I would have a career. It was assumed that I would have a meaningful career and a meaningful education, and that was just a given, and I feel very lucky about that. And I certainly assume that when I hope that I will raise my kids in that same way, so much so that it's not even an issue whether they will have both families and careers, but that they will be able to find some sort of balance, both my sons and my daughter. But I went to college and I went to graduate school, and then I worked for a while in public policy and in nonprofits, and then I went to the corporate side and worked my way up on the corporate side for a while, to a point that I found after I had my second baby that was not going to be sustainable for me personally at that point. And I started my own business, and I'm lucky to now have a balance, I think, that allows me to balance both family and have a very meaningful career at the same time.
That's one thing Anne-Marie was talking about, being self-employed.
Right. Yeah, it does help. It really does help, and I think that's something that not everybody can do or have, but it certainly helps on controlling your schedule. And my husband does as well, which also I think is very important to say, is it can't just work when just one person has that flexibility.
Yes,
it's very important that both men and women have that flexibility.
So Anne, tell us about you. You're an attorney married to an attorney.
Yes, and just to correct, I did not go to Yale Law School. Yale was my undergrad, but Penn for law school. Would have liked to go to Yale Law School.
All right,
but just
good. I'm glad we cleared
to be
that up.
accurate, so I was a lawyer. I actually studied literature and thought that maybe I would become a professor and realized I didn't have the gifts for that. So went to law school and worked in a law firm in Washington, D.C. in corporate and securities law. Long hours, and then eventually went in-house at PBS at the headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia, which I loved. At that point I was married and we were expecting our first child, and I went on maternity leave, and the maternity leave was nearing an end, and I just realized I was not ready to go back. And fortunately my husband has been tremendously supportive of that decision, and now we have 3 kids, and I have been at home since 14 years now. And also the balance of trying to find meaningful ways to spend that time. It's a tremendous gift to be able to stay home. I feel very fortunate that I'm able to make that choice and make it work for our whole family. And I just thought that at this point in my life, it's for me, the most meaningful way I could spend my time during these years, knowing that it's very short, relatively, and that I will go back and do something else.
A true thing for anyone who is out of the job market for a while trying to get back in, that sometimes things change to an extent that you're not as attractive to an employer, or there are people ahead of you who do have the skills you need. How do we overcome that and allow women to come in and out or back to it if they want to?
You know, I think that's where we're headed, because you look at the cutting edge industries, Silicon Valley and other places. I mean, people move around a whole lot more than they used to. And I think if you're using your time that's not in a traditional job, but you've done interesting projects, if you have the liberty to be able to volunteer for things, there are lots of organizations that would love a mature, experienced person who can come in and help on particular projects. Maybe it's not full-time, but that can grow. So I think we're really lucky to be in an environment, not in the high-level government jobs that were mentioned in the article, not in some of the high-powered law firms, but there are fabulous opportunities to contribute to our economy and our country if you think outside the box a little bit.
I agree with that. I mean, I think that that not only are we making progress, although we're certainly not where we need to be, I think, from a work culture perspective, but a lot of companies are making progress not only on the fluidity of a career and how that might change over the time. It's not just you're constantly working your way up, but also on the type of, when you are working at a job, the kind of things that are important. My business partner and I, we are big believers in what's called ROWE, Results Only Work Environment, and that was started at Best Buy, and Gap has implemented it. And what that really means is it doesn't matter your face time, it doesn't matter when you do the job, it doesn't matter how many hours it's taking you to get to do the job, that what's important are the results. And I think that that is, as we start to look at our workforce, not just for women, but for men as well, the more that companies can focus on that and not on the face time will make things a lot more friendly to families, both men and women who are trying to balance families and jobs.
One of the things I really liked about Anne Marie Slaughter's article was her idea of redefining the arc of a successful career. And I've been fascinated. I'm always interested to talk to women who've had the non-linear career path. Yeah. It's not a linear ascent, and I think the perceptions are changing that women, what Anne Marie Slaughter calls an investment interval, that a time that maybe is not opting out, it's just a pause. And that it's a career may not, and of course, in a few years, I'll find out if this is possible. I can get back into a career, but I think that recognizing that women who take time off, it's going to be a different career path, but that's not necessarily going to be a negative.
I'm glad you brought up things that are friendly to all families, because part of the criticism on this Anne Marie Slaughter article is that she was talking to what you would call elite women, certainly not women who have minimum wage jobs and are trying maybe 3 jobs and trying to pull things together. Do you agree that electing a woman president and more women lawmakers would make a difference for those women too?
Well, I think what we now know after a couple of decades of the middle class really being under income pressures and the loss of pensions and benefits, that we really have to change the direction of our country so that we know that there are certain basic supports that everyone needs for a long career in life, that if we do it together, the American productivity, David Brooks wrote in the New York Times this weekend, Americans are workers. We don't have to worry about us not working. What we have to do is make sure there are decent floors underneath people. And so I think getting back to understanding that we can't just wring people dry, that's not good for the long term. Education, and the article mentioned it, being educated is really important. So we know, we're very aware, the three of us, that there are a lot of women who don't have as many options as we have, but fixing the education system, my particular thing, and then understanding that certain supports underneath people so they can work will benefit everyone.
I agree. To your question also on electing women to office, I think it's terrific that we've made so much progress, and I hope that becomes a point in my kid's life where that's just a given, and frankly that even the term feminist becomes on par with abolitionist, which is you're just, of course you are, it's assumed. It's not something that you have to assert. But I also want to be careful to say that just electing women to office is not going to change the workplaces. It's not going to change the number of choices that we as women have, or not, and women who aren't as fortunate to have educations. That is not by itself going to do it. I've worked in male-dominated industries. I've worked in female-dominated industries, and there's got to be a balance. God help us, frankly, if we had a Congress that was as dominated by women as it was by men for the last 200 years. If you don't have a balance where you have families that are understanding that it takes both, then I think that you're not making progress.
And I think she acknowledges that it really, the changes that she has in mind would help fathers achieve the balance, and even non-parents. Employees who have elderly parents to take care of, who need the flexibility. So it's really not just a women's issue, that it really would help across the board, just the work-life balance. So.
Barbara, when you decided to run, as you say, Bill Ritter called you. You had told me in an earlier conversation that you wouldn't have ever thought of it if someone hadn't asked you to run. Is that why you think more women are not on that track in politics?
We know that. There's a lot of research about why they don't. And one is it almost feels like bad manners to put yourself out there unless you have a mentor who kind of guides you through. There are plenty of women who have done it, but there's a hesitation. There's a worry that the environment now is so angry and partisan that you would be putting yourself in an environment that a lot of women just don't want to subject themselves or their families to. So I think we have a lot of cultural reasons around why women don't, but they grew up out of experience and they can change out of experience. And I think if we keep mentoring and training and recruiting and changing the environment that we all live in terms of political beliefs, it's going to be easier for women to put themselves out there.
Now, Heather, Dottie Lamb, your mother ran for Senate. How old were you then, and what was that like?
She ran for Senate when I was in graduate school. So
okay, so you weren't a small child, that's right.
Yeah, I wasn't small anymore. But it was a terrific experience to see her go through that and really seize that opportunity and just look at it and say, I need to do this because I can stand losing, but what I can't stand is not trying. And that was really very much. I love that as a role model, which is you need to take those risks and you need to be able to do that. And
you talk about how it's culturally less accepted, or women think it is somehow, to step up in that way. Do you think it's best to leave it the way it is and let women opt in as they will, or is there something that should be done to change the cultural attitude about it?
Because I was in an elected position, and I'm always careful to say, but someone invited me to the dance. I did not put myself out there, but I have really gone out of my way to give trainings to any group that's training women to run for office or to be campaign managers. and the interest in doing that. These sessions are packed. I think there's a real interest, and I think the next step is going to come. You know, now we have more women in the Senate. We have a legislature that's very balanced. So I think the next step is going to be easier as more young women see that they can find out how to do it. Someone will mentor them. Someone will let them know legally, here's what you do. In terms of networks, here's what you do. So I think we're going to see big movement in this direction.
I was just going to say I completely agree, and I think part of it is also education. I mean, education is so important toward, and strong education toward getting women to understand that they can have that possibility. I was visiting the Gals School here in Denver recently, and one of the statistics that the leader of the school mentions, which, not statistics, but one of the things that she says is that there, you know, when girls that are 13, there are more girls that are 13 that would rather be in the coffin than give an obituary. Meaning, you know, there's a real lack of girls liking to get up and make a speech or you know, talk in public. And until we address that kind of confidence and that ability of girls to be able to assert themselves from an education perspective from a very early age, why would they want to run for office? So I think that's a really important important part of it.
That's a really good point. But how is your daughter in that way, Anne?
Well, I think that self-esteem, I mean, really from the time, it doesn't change. I mean, I think that still, you know, we think about our choices and we compare ourselves and think, have I made the right choices? Am I doing the right thing? And I actually was talking to my daughter today in the car, because I was telling her on the way to school that I was doing this. I said, do you and your friends talk about this, you know, about what you're going to do? And she's in 9th grade. She said, well, we talk about how many kids we want to have and how far apart. And I said, well, do you talk about careers or jobs? And she said, no, not yet. But I mean, no doubt that's, you know, I hope they're all being, you know, that's definitely in their minds. And it's, but sort of right now what they can get their heads around.
Yes, that's right. What they can see right now is their mother raising 3 children.
And, you know, but you still think about that as a role model. Like, am I, you know, if I were working, am I, by staying home, it's, you know, it's a different message. Although, as I said, I think that if I can raise good, productive members of society, I'm doing a good thing. But I would like my daughter to know I did work, and I'm going to work again in something.
I can remember my mother, my own odyssey was straight into a career, and I've never had children. And of course I consider those my own choices. I remember, though, my mother has said several times that from her generation to mine, you know, she just didn't have choices, these same kinds of choices, and she certainly would have been someone, I think, who might have pursued a career. She did later. She was a teacher. But I think that in some ways, women feel some pressure about what choices they make, don't you think?
You know, it's hard because they're not only your choices, but the whole life progression of your children depends on how wise you are when you make these choices. And I think getting a little closer to Hillary Clinton's "It takes a village to raise a child," it does take a lot of people. It shouldn't just be on the shoulders of the nuclear family. And I think the more we, you know, make preschool and kindergarten and after-school programs affordable and available, you know, in those, at least in those middle years, it's going to be easier for women to know their children are in a safe, good place and they're learning, and to figure out how they can use their own talents. So I think part of it is getting the whole system or society more aligned toward knowing that it's actually good for kids to have their own opportunities and not all of it be mom-driven.
Right.
So let's come back to the headline on that Atlantic article. Do you have it all, Barbara O'Brien?
I think I do now, but for the previous 30 years of my 40-year marriage, I would have said both my husband and I made a lot of trade-offs, but we were content with them, and that's fine with me.
So at a certain point, all didn't mean so much as enough, maybe.
Right, and getting to a point now where the children are out of the house, where my husband and I are both successful, we're really fortunate, and we can choose what we want to do. But for the important child-rearing years, of course we made trade-offs for the kids.
Now, Anne, we've heard you say, I mean, obviously you have in mind going back to a career, so you don't have it all yet, but do you feel as though...
I do. I feel like I've had it all in segments, though, in sequence, not at the same time. That I was able to have a really satisfying career and get to where I wanted to be in that career, and then made a different choice for, you know, for this period of time, and then I'll make another choice. So I do feel like I've had it all, but not at the same time.
And Heather, how about you as the youngest? Do you have it all?
I can test the question. I think the entire concept of having it all is a little bit bizarre. The benchmark has always been having it all, probably meaning, you know, the traditional male role of having a high-powered career and having a supportive family. And I guess I would question whether those men really did have it all, because I think those are men who grew up not seeing their kids and not having meaningful involvement in the community, for instance. So I feel like I have a terrific balance right now, and more importantly, I think my husband has a terrific balance. Not more importantly, but as importantly, my husband has a terrific balance. So we as a family have a balance that works, and we have a little bit of everything, and that works for us right now. But I wouldn't even know what all of it is. I mean, I don't have a house in the south of France, so you know, there's always more.
Yes, now I am missing that as well. I was feeling fine until you mentioned it.
You have to put that on the to-do list.
Definitely something to strive for.
Right, and you always need something to strive for. I want to come back to women in Washington. You mentioned, Barbara, about how acrimonious it is in the political world. You know, who would want to go through a campaign these days? Certainly not the one that we've just seen happen. Do more women getting into the Congress bode well? I mean, will it change, do you think? What will change that?
I don't think there's proof around the world that just having women in office changes things, because they get there by winning in the system that we have now. I think it has to come from the people. I mean, I think the rest of us really have to say, enough of this. We're not going to vote for people who push this horrible, vicious stuff, and that's what will change the system.
And it's certainly true that you, not in Colorado, I wouldn't say, but in other states, there were women in there as viciously fighting as the men. I mean, it wasn't as though they had any option but to have a fist fight of a campaign.
And I think, like in most things, the economics will drive it more than anything else. And so employers recognizing that for them to have the best employees are going, for both men and women, are going to have to change the way that they think about schedules and the way that they think about family is frankly has more ability to change the system and change that ability to have balance than I think anything at a government level does. As much as I would love to continue to see more women getting into office, I'm with Barbara that I don't think that alone is going to change
I think that flexibility will bring the best talent. I think that is going to attract the best people. So
I mean, we have an example just in
I was
medicine.
just going to ask for an example.
When you have the majority of women now going to medical school, and my husband says all the time he can't believe the kind of options that now exist in a career in medicine over a lifetime. You don't just go into one little practice and you do that 70 or 80 hours a week for 35 years. So I think once you see people, talented people rise and say, for me to keep doing this, I need this kind of flexibility, that it starts to change, because talent matters.
Yes, and because who's there needs it to change.
I think a lot of companies, a lot of big technology companies in Silicon Valley are focusing much more on results versus schedules. And so you have, they create campuses that you can get absolutely everything in your life done, right? If you go to Facebook, you can have your car washed, you can have your dry cleaning done, you can have your kids at daycare, you can have everything on that campus. Whether or not that's good is another question. But I think the combination of making it easier for families to get things done during the day, and also not caring so much if you are there from 8 to 5, or if you're there from 10 to 7, or if you're there, from 8 p.m. until 4 a.m. If that's when you work, and that's when you're a developer, and that's when you work, who cares, right? So I think there are pockets. I don't know that I could name a single company that's doing it all perfectly, but I think there are pockets of companies that are doing it really well.
Let's end with each of you giving us a little bit of advice. Anne, if you'll start, what are you going to tell your daughter or your son? I mean, we've had a glimpse of that, but what is your advice, I guess, for your daughter on having it all?
On having, I think that it's probably going to be important to really think about what is going to make her happy, and knowing enough about those career choices and what that career really means, whether it's a job where you really do have to be there in person every day, or is it the kind of job where you can telecommute, or where the results are more important than your being there across the desk from someone, or in whatever field. I think that that's going to be important. I think that recognizing the biology and the clock that, you know, is inherent, and if she wants to have children, then you just need to kind of plan it out. And I thought, obviously there's no clear answer on that, but we'll continue to try to find a balance, and I hope that all my kids can.
Barbara, I guess your two sons aren't really looking for advice from you on having it all.
and yet I share advice on a regular basis. You know, we never talk about having it all. What we talk about is something my dad used to tell me, which was, wherever you are, leave your campsite better than you found it. Mm-hmm. And it's to get satisfaction out of knowing, just make things better wherever you are.
Last short comment, your 1-year-old daughter is going to have something to ask you later.
Exactly. I would tell all 3 of my kids the same. I think it's important on my boys as well. It's find something that you're really passionate about and that you want to do. But for all of them, make sure you also realize the importance of family if you want to have a family, and don't let that get sidelined. That's critical.
That's great, and that is Colorado State of Mind for this week. You can see this program again at video.rmpbs.org. We thank Heather Lamb, Ann Geldzoller, and Barbara O'Brien for a very good conversation tonight in this week's edition on women's roles and leadership. Next week, another woman leader of the largest school district in Colorado, Jefferson County. Cindy Stevenson will join us with Paul Teske of the CU Graduate School of Public Affairs and education reporter Nancy Mitchell of Ed News Colorado to talk about how well some districts did in the 2012 election in convincing taxpayers to give them more money. That is next week at this time. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Cynthia Hessen.
Well, you know, if you're working, you feel, you know, I know she just like she should be at home, and if you're at home, you feel like, oh, I should be working. But I think that the more conversations about it, and the more role models we have for women who are doing either interesting things at home or have been at home and are able to then get back into the workforce. I think that helps.
Clearly, we're too hard on ourselves.
Yeah, I think women, yes, can be their own worst
critics.